It's time to get our drink on.
Oh, man. Is it ever?
Start the game already!
What are you drinking?
Beer. It's Ransack the Universe by Collective Arts, which is apparently a West Coast IPA. My friend Mac brought it over during one of the open house things that Cindy was hosting. I have no idea what it's like. Let's find out. Oh, wow. That is a fruity IPA. Oh, it's a hoppy IPA. It is a similar level of hoppiness to Bone Shaker, but there's a good beer underneath it.
Well, that's something then.
Yeah. It's definitely not the kind of thing that I would sit down and drink a half a dozen of. But you know what? It's not bad.
I decided to pull a Telson this week.
Oh, God.
No, it has the potential to be amazing. Tanya went out to do some shopping. And this was when we were going to record the other day.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, well, hey, you're going to be right beside an LCBO. Would you mind picking me up some drinks? And then I said, surprise me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
There will be some absolute dogs in that mix, but there might be something in there that turns out fantastic.
So unlike Cindy, who picked things, I guess, primarily on color and stuff like that, Tanya's focus seemed to be primarily on names.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, she went thematically too. So I have a couple here that I'm probably going to get into. I've got Flying Monkey, Craft Brewery, Theater of Madness. Strong beer with pumpkin and spices. And the other one here, which I absolutely love the imagery on, is called Sasquatch Schnitzel. That's a Vienna-style lager from Kitchissippi Beer Company. It's got a picture. Here, I'll see if I can get it close enough to my camera. I know my focus is off, but it's like a black Sasquatch in a like lederhosen. And it's got a sausage on a fork just sitting on like a checkered, like, I don't know what you would call it.
It's
like
picnic.
A picnic blanket kind of thing. So I think I'm going to start with the pumpkin lager, given that it's seasonal, but I'm definitely going to get into both of these today.
Oh boy. Well, we might have to take another mid-session, whatchamacallit? Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Because I only brought the one beer. And I do still have the Bone Shaker. So after one of these, I might be okay for that one.
Now, there's probably about 10 more miscellaneous items like this in the fridge that will bust out over the next few weeks, but all of them equally wildly named and interesting. There's at least one IPA in there that I'm like, I really like. It's a cool package. I don't know that it'll be for me, but one of them is, and it's a huge, like it's a tall boy.
Oh, like a Bubba.
And I don't mind Bose, like the regular Bose Brewery, Bose Lug Tread, but it's Juiced AF, it's called.
I had there was one of those in my birthday beers. I drank it last week. It's actually quite nice. It's more fruity than it is hoppy, so you might be okay with it.
I'll get into it then.
I've had Flying Monkeys Brewery stuff before, and it's usually interesting. I'm not certain that I would say always good.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is, you know what? Like the pumpkin. Sometimes you get like the Halloween and fall stuff, and I have another pumpkin option downstairs too. And it's very, very pumpkin,
mm-hmm.
or no pumpkin at all, but has like the pumpkin spice.
Right.
This is subtle. It's mostly just a strong beer, but just a hint, just a sprinkle.
That's really what you want, though. I mean, you want like a little bit of, just a little bit of pumpkin, sort of in the floral bouquet of the pumpkin smell.
I got pumpkin registers here, more than flavor.
It has a wonderful nose.
Yeah. How long do you think we could pull off doing a show where we pretended to be snobs? Like, could we make it a minute and still be
No.
convincing?
Nope. Oh, I think 2 sentences is about as far as I can get. Listen, I could probably pull it off for longer than a bull rider stays on a bull, but only just.
Yeah. And you'd probably pull it off longer than I could.
And you know what? Like, I would need a rodeo clown to pull me out of it afterwards.
Brace yourself, Betsy.
Oh, God. So it's been a week or two.
It has been. Now, it hasn't been a week or two since I think listeners will hear us, assuming that I get off my ass and edit this episode in the next week or so.
Yeah. Our sponsor this week will be very disappointed if you don't.
It's true. This episode is brought to you by, I don't know, Flying Monkey.
Sure. Just one of them, though. Not all of them.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's been some, I won't get into the details, but some personal stuff going on. Had a death in my family, so in addition to dealing with that, lots of preparations and things that had to happen and stuff. So I've been looking forward to these drinks for like a week and a half now. I've been looking forward to recording.
Yeah, me too, to be honest. I mean, I wrote a bunch of stuff down, and reading over it again, I'm like, man, these are some clever ideas. Oh, shit, I wrote that.
I wonder what I meant.
There is an element of that, and it's probably going to get worse the closer to the bottom of this beer I get.
I did have what is the concept of an idea? Is that what it is? I've had something rattling around in my brain for a while now. And as I've been distracting myself this past couple weeks, watching more YouTube videos primarily, but listening to some podcasts, trying some new creators out, I've noticed, I don't want to say it's a trend, because I mean, it's obviously a trend. Everybody knows it's a trend, but it's got a different flavor or a different nose now that I'm thinking about it than I would normally think. And the basic idea is, why do we love retro? And this is the royal we, people in general. And does it mean anything that we do? So there's going to be a couple caveats in this discussion. What I'm thinking about, I think, is beyond the normal sort of what's old is new again, fashions and trends sort of having a cyclical nature, right? Like, there seems to be a more concerted effort for people to enjoy old things now. And not just the stuff that's like from their child. Like for me to go and play retro video games, I mean, that would just be like, oh yeah, he's a boomer. He's enjoying the stuff from his youth, right?
You're not a boomer.
No, I feel like a boomer.
Oh.
I'm barely Gen X, man.
Yeah, it's true.
I'm like 25 days away from being a millennial.
Yeah, you're an exennial.
Yeah, whatever that is.
Yeah.
In my consumption of media this past couple of weeks, I've come across creators that are focusing on things like using like 90s and early 2000s camcorders, unironically, you know, or a big sort of revival of cassettes for listening to audio. I was watching restorations of like Sony Walkmans and a whole bunch of stuff where there's the whole thing of like vinyl, right? Like vinyl's always had fans, and those fans will say it's because the sound is better. I think they're objectively wrong. I think the sound is different, but there are arguments above and beyond the quality of sound for vinyl. Like the experience of vinyl is superior in a lot of ways. Everything from just the tangible feel of this sort of big thing in your hand to the canvas that it offers for artwork and inserts, and like it's an experience, right?
I would say that shellac is objectively better than vinyl, just to throw a wrinkle into the argument. I don't believe it, but I'll play devil's advocate just for the lols.
But, vinyl has always had its fans, and whether you agree with them or not, there were arguments to be made for it.
Yeah.
A lot of the things that I'm seeing, like maybe they're aesthetic choices to a certain extent, like people that are getting big into cassette tapes again. And I just want to be clear, like when I'm saying tape, I'm not talking reel-to-reel tapes, stuff that's got like high feet per second where you could argue that there is superior sound quality to be had. I'm talking your old sort of consumer level, straight, cheap-ass cassette tapes, which never produced superior quality sound, even compared to the vinyl before, right?
No, they were just a little bit more portable, a little bit cheaper. They were a little bit more robust. Like you could play them in the car, right? They wouldn't skip. I think that was the major thing. I mean, if you were going to go and say, well, what's better? 8-track was better than cassette tape, right? I think. I don't know.
It's other drawbacks, but yeah.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, like this specific area of discussion for retro and quality is kind of a funny one for me. Because I don't know if you know this, but I have some reasonably, I wouldn't say severe, but like moderate hearing damage, right? So there are large parts of registers of sound that I just don't hear. And in the same way that like I'm nearsighted, I'm also like, I have the same kind of problem with my ears where I can hear noises, but like there's like, is this, a higher quality noise than that? I don't know. Can't tell. I literally can't tell. I will say that there is a difference in the character of sound. Having said that, I'm now going to go and be like, okay, so I'm going to sound like the sound expert here, or at least I'm going to pretend.
Noted audiophile.
Yes, noted audiophile, the guy who's like perfectly fine with Bose headphones because their customer service is great. I don't give a shit about the quality of their actual headphones. There is a difference in the quality of sound from vinyl versus, for example, digital. Like even like FLAC, lossless, like high quality digital stuff. There's a certain warmth that exists in the things that make it less quality, if that makes any sense. Like some of the artifacts and the bullshit actually make the sound more natural.
Yeah,
but
and I guess
it's not much. It's very subtle.
But that's an important distinction. There's a warmth in the artifacts that makes it sound, you could argue if you want to use the word natural, but it isn't actually more faithful or accurate to the original recording. Like if you look at, we'll take CD audio as a comparison. Yes, digital format, but like the amount of data that you're capturing by the time it gets swung back to analog, it's essentially lossless. Like that is the most faithful of what we've discussed so far to being accurate to the original sound that was recorded and then being reproduced of all of these options. Now, you can argue that doesn't make it more pleasing to the ear. So,
yes, and I would.
The imperfections that are injected by something like vinyl, maybe they create a listening experience that you enjoy more, but it isn't more accurate, and that's fine.
No,
if it's just like this is the flavor that I like, then there's no argument against you at this point. Like this is
right, and okay, so we do this a lot, you and I, where we have an argument where we're literally arguing about two different things. But you're correct in what you're saying, that it is very much not more accurate to the original. But I do believe that it is a more pleasant, not even more pleasant, but it's a different listening experience, and it's one that I enjoy a little bit more. Not significantly more. I'm perfectly fine with CDs and digital audio. It's fine. But I would argue that the artifacts introduced by cassette tapes specifically make it less pleasant to listen to.
Oh, I absolutely agree. We troubleshooted some microphone hiss as an example just before we hit record here. You had a little bit like higher noise floor. And that's the type of stuff that you run into with cassettes.
Yeah.
Now, it is probably worth noting that like a lot of the people that are listening to cassettes aren't listening to them on like a hi-fi system where you're hearing a lot of that noise floor. Some of that stuff gets lost in listening to it through shitty headphones and a Walkman or something like that. And of the people that have been listening to cassettes more, I would say it skews, not a big majority, but skews in the direction of people that are listening to like old Walkmans. I am seeing a lot of people that are listening to like older hi-fi systems and sort of rebuilding that kind of stuff too. I think the audio stuff is where sort of the retro thing has kind of always been there. So I think I want to put that aside for a moment and maybe talk about retro in its other forms. I guess I'll throw the question out at you and I'll let you talk for a while before I start drilling things down. Do you enjoy retro? What sort of retro things do you enjoy and why do you enjoy them?
Okay, so yes, I do. Typically, the things that I enjoy are not so much the recording format of the media, but media and just things that remind me of my youth. There's an argument that goes around a bunch of times about like, oh, music in the 70s and the 80s was so much better. And here's the thing, right? The music that we still listen to from the 70s and 80s is probably on average better than all of the music that's coming out today. But the best of today's music is at least on par with all of that, right? We just haven't filtered out the crap yet. Mm-hmm. So when we go back a lot of times and look at stuff from our youth, it's like, okay, well, we're only hitting the highlights. Like we're only seeing the best stuff. We're only going back to the things that we have already enjoyed once. And there's a comfort to it as well, right? Like I really enjoy, like I would give up a whole lot of stuff to go back and eat my mom's spaghetti, right? I literally haven't had my mom's spaghetti in like 30 years. I mean, I keep trying to figure out how to make that, and I can't. But I eat spaghetti, and it sort of brings back those memories, right? Like it's a recall of the senses to a time when you felt good. And I think that's probably going to circle back into one of your later points in the whole idea of retro, is that it's really just a callback to a time when I felt comfortable, when I felt in control, when I felt like, hey, I know what's happening. Because like when I was 18 years old, right, I thought I had the world by the balls. I thought I knew everything and nobody was going to surprise me with anything. And now I'm 50 and I look around at the world and go, I don't understand shit. Like, what is life? I don't even know. Right. And it's sometimes that's scary. Right. But I go back and like watch a movie or a TV show or listen to some music that I was listening to when I was, in my teens and early 20s. And I'm like, yeah, I remember what it felt like when I heard this song. Right. When you hear the song that you first danced with somebody and you think, oh, yeah, like that was an exciting moment. Right. You hear that song when you had your first kiss and it's like, oh, man, that was a good day. Right. You can't recapture that, but you can remind yourself of it.
Sure. And I think what you've described there is probably the more traditional relationship with retro. It's what you think of when you think of retro, kind of harkening back to the old days or the glory days of your own youth, where there's sort of a personal relationship with whatever, whatever it is you're discussing. Do you have anything that you are like enjoying in your life now, consuming, doing, things you're thinking about, that you would qualify as retro, but you don't have that link to it in the past? Like you're enjoying it as if it were new or new to you, at least?
I can't call anything to mind. No, not really. There probably is something, but there's, I mean, I go back and maybe Eminem has been showing up in my YouTube feed a lot recently. And I mean, like back when Eminem was like when Slim Shady came out, which is like a really scary long time ago now, because it feels like yesterday. Like it came out and I sort of listened to it if it came on the radio or if somebody was playing it, whatever. And I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. But I'm hearing it now and going, this is actually really, really good. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that really qualifies. It doesn't really fit that. There's nothing.
It kind of does, because you're looking back at it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
And I guess when I ask that question, like it does sort of apply to more broad kind of ideas and concepts. Um, I've talked about it before, but my interests have changed as the years have gone on. I spend a lot of time in it, like a ridiculous amount of time consuming content about things that younger me would not have enjoyed or had a personal connection with. Like I watch a lot of woodworking stuff, a lot of content with people making stuff with their hands.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person that sort of grew up technically inclined and embraced new technologies and was always kind of trying to ride the cutting edge, it says something about me, that something inside me has changed at some point, that I'm now seeking entertainment and comfort and letting my interests sort of drift into territories that younger me, quite frankly, would have made fun of current me for, right?
Yeah. Well, you're an old man now.
Well, I am. And I know there's a thing like, old men have old interests. Like I looked at my grandfather. He was what I would call sort of your hobbyist woodworker that all grandfathers were. He had experience doing that stuff when he was younger. His father and his grandfather all had a certain amount of woodworking that they had to do because you needed that for life, whether you were, maintaining a house or, they all did it. There was a certain baseline kind of experience and comfort level with tools that I think was much more prevalent back then. So he wasn't approaching woodworking in his retirement as a new thing. It was, I need to find something to keep myself busy. I know how to do this. And most of the stuff that he made was, kitschy sort of grandpa decoration stuff. Like it wasn't fine woodworking, and that's not the point. But it was a natural sort of thing for him to get into because that's something he'd already done. Now, I dabbled a little bit, I guess, in watching my father build stuff, but it wasn't something I ever found a ton of enjoyment in when I was younger. There was a lot of, here, bud, hold the light kind of stuff where it's like I was expected, it was work to me. I wasn't making anything, I was fucking around with tools, and, there's a certain comfort level, I guess, with that maybe contributes to the interest now. But my interest in it is just, it isn't necessarily because it's old or something that I yearn for from my past. It's because it is completely in contrast, I guess, to what life is like today. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a bit when we start drawing some conclusions from this.
There's an interesting thing that I started thinking about as you were talking, and it's like a lot of life, especially up to this point, has been very much time constrained, right? I've been thinking about this a lot lately, actually. It's like you will be in your desk at 8:30. You will sit at your desk until 4:30. And it doesn't matter how much work you get done in that time, right? It's all about the time you spend. And there's a constant, and life is just like this, where there's like everything is always a rush, right? Like you have to be there by a certain time. You have to travel faster to get there. You're always in a rush. You're like running out the door in the morning, packing your lunch as you're literally pulling on your pants. And that kind of thing, because I am starting to enjoy that a bit more as well, right? And for a long time, I didn't enjoy it because it always felt like this is going to take forever and I just don't have time. And now the idea that this is going to take forever and I'm just going to take the time to do it is a very different feeling, and one that I didn't enjoy when I was younger. Right. Like I'm doing like getting the snowblower ready for the winter season. And it's, like grind this, loosen this bolt, change the skids on the bottom of it, stuff like that. Like it's all super simple stuff, but it's like, oh, I don't have the right wrench. Okay. I'll walk to the other room and get the right wrench, and I'll come back and I'll undo the bolts. Like I spent, I think, 4 hours yesterday figuring out how to do a thing. And it's about an hour's worth of work, like if you're familiar with it, but I spent 4 hours doing it. And I didn't finish it. I got to finish it actually after we're finished recording here. But it gave me a certain amount of pleasure to realize that like I don't have to finish this in 10 minutes. Like I got to finish it before the snow flies. which, given our current situation, might just be February. Who knows? But like just the idea that I can just take my time and do it right. And if I get stuck, I can just go, you know what? I'm going to walk away for a little bit and it's okay. Right. Like there's a level of comfort there that is strange, but it does actually make me feel nostalgic for summers as a kid when you feel like, oh, I've got the whole summer. Like that's literally forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know about you, but I don't feel that way much anymore. Yeah, like a week ago it was spring and now it's fall again.
Yeah. So I want to mention one thing real quick here because it might just sort of shift the perspective and change the discussion a bit. And then I want to talk about your wife.
Uh-oh.
No, it's all good. So one of the things that, and this has been stuck with me, it's been around for a while. I think this probably I first heard it maybe a year and a half ago. We've talked about the Smarter Everyday channel, Destin Sandlin. I've plugged one of his podcasts before. If you haven't ever checked it out, listeners, like do it. It's great content. Like it's just all bangers. He did a video or a series of videos, like I say, it was probably going on 2 years ago now, about film photography. And film is another one of those retro things that's making a pretty big comeback.
Mm.
And not just like that sort of weird phase where we tried to recreate Polaroids for about 6 months and, then the fad died off again. Like shooting on film is making a pretty big comeback. But what he said, the thing that stuck with me is less about shooting on film and more about what it represented. And that is that the process of shooting on film has an intentionality to it that we lack, I think, in the way we do a lot of things now. We have this digital computer with cameras on it in our pocket that we carry with us. And I mean, not everybody behaves this way, but anytime you see anything that is even moderately interesting, you pull it out, it's there, you take not just one picture of it, but 72 pictures of it. You don't think about the way you're taking the pictures. You're not thinking about staging it. I mean, you'll just shoot from a bunch of different angles and maybe you'll throw some filters on it. Then you'll throw your phone back in your pocket and chances are you'll never look at those pictures again.
Yes.
Where when you're shooting on film, the combination of the fact that film in its very nature is sort of a limited resource, there's no instant feedback. You don't get to see immediately the picture that you took. So you go about the process of taking that picture a little bit differently. You think about it. What do you need to do? What's the lighting like? At maximum, I can only shoot 24 of these before I run out of film and I have other things that I want to take pictures of. So I'm going to take one picture. Let's take that picture. And then you don't get to see the result until you go through the process of either developing the film or having it develop and get your prints back. And even that, the anticipation, the wait is part of that process that is completely different to how things work today. So I don't know. I find myself, and maybe you can speak to this about yourself, so much of what I do to fill the moments on a day-to-day basis now lacks that intentionality. When I want to listen to music, I'm not thinking about the music that I want to listen to. We'll just throw something on. And this was true of the radio back in the day, but you just listen to whatever kind of came at you. If I want to read something, I'm not, thinking about what I want to read. Chances are I'm pulling up a social feed and I'm just taking what's thrown at me. And that was true for watching TV and stuff back in the day too. But it's all turned up to 11 now. Even
Yes.
The process of playing video games and watching TV and movies feels so much different. Like I think about going back in my youth, and I don't pine for this, right? This isn't something that would appeal to me again, but going to a movie rental place, a Blockbuster, even your small town, mom and pop one. I remember going as kids or young teens and the process of like, you've got 15 minutes, figure out what you want to watch. This is the thing you're going to watch this week. Pick it out. You can each pick one. We're going to go home. We're going to watch it because we have to have it back by Monday. I did the same with video games. I rented a lot of video games. And I mean, there were just less video games back then to begin with. But the contrast between going to a movie rental place, which is where we also got our video games, and picking one of 180 bad games. There was good games mixed in there, but most of them were not great games. Finding one that looked like it interested me, even though it was probably bad, taking it home, having no reservations about playing it, enjoying that game, despite the fact that it was probably bad, and having an entirely satisfying experience is so in contrast to the kind of shit that I go through now, which is, oh, I finished Horizon Forbidden West. I really should get into something else. Let me look at my Steam library with things that would literally take me 3 minutes to get up and running and installed and playing. And I spend more time looking at my library, figuring out what I want to play, deciding, nothing's jumping out at me, and not playing a game, and then complaining that I'm bored. I think because that process lacks that sort of intentionality. Like the mindset's skewed. I don't want to play a video game. I want a video game to play me now. I don't want to put in the work of deciding what to do. Just happen. Let me consume. My mouth is open. Get in the craw zone. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Okay, so I made a couple of notes while you were talking, and I hope that I remember all the things that I was thinking about. So you spoke about like listening to things on the radio, and I think that there's a certain amount of like looking at a social media feed is very similar to that in a certain way, in that it is a curated amount, like information, right? So listening to the radio or reading a social media feed or choosing for yourself, like what I think what you're describing is like the entertainment that we did or the things that we did were curated by someone, whether it was us or someone else saying, this is what you're going to listen to. There was a list and you did it. I have an interesting point to bring up in that I checked out a library book last week, 2 weeks ago, for the first time in 20 years. It has been 20. I've been to a library before, and I've gotten stuff from the library, but it was always, my wife had a credit card or a library card. And I would just say, hey, we should, like, because there's movies at the library now, right? So you can actually recreate that. If you're looking for that blockbuster experience, you can recreate it at the library. There is a similar due date. They have a similar selection. Like your local library probably bought up the DVD selection from Blockbuster when they went out of business. So it is. I do agree with you that there is a certain lack of. There's a couple of things. Number one is that we have now the paradox that you have so much choice that you can't make a choice, right? It is actually easier, and you would probably enjoy the situation more if it's you have these two games to choose from. Choose one. If you had two games to choose from, you would immediately choose one and just play it. But because there's so many, you spend so much time going, because I do this too, right? Mm-hmm. Like I'm 100% on board with it. Where you just look at it and you go, no.
Yeah, and this applies to like picking something to watch on Netflix is another prime example, right?
Oh my God, yes. The number of times that I have flipped through like Netflix as a sort of stand-in for all of the streaming services, because I don't have Netflix at the moment, but like Prime Video, Disney Channel, whatever, you're flipping through stuff and going, no, not today, no, not today, no, not today, no, not today. And by the time you finish going through the list, it's time for bed. So there's a thing that loops around to, and I've said before that like on the internet, there's only two categories of things. There's the absolute best thing ever, and there is the literal worst. And everything pretty much exists in between those two extremes. So we get kind of caught up in the idea that, well, we have to choose the best one. When like there are thousands of video games that would be okay and you would enjoy and you would have fun playing. You could probably almost Russian roulette your Steam library and go, this one, and just play it. At one time, you were interested in playing all of those games, so pick any one of them, and you'll probably enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. We mentioned radio and how there was a certain similarity, like this is the stuff that's curated, this is the best. What I find interesting, at least about my approach now versus back then, is I used to listen to the radio. I would hear a band that I didn't recognize. I would be like, that song's awesome. I'd hear it a couple times on the radio. And then I would go and buy their album. And then I would listen to not only that song that I heard, but I would listen to the rest of it, the B-sides. And I would pick the songs of that album that I liked the most. Where now, I mean, I don't know if what about the process has changed, but if you happen to hear something that you came up in an algorithmically driven list while you're listening to a Spotify or streaming music of some sort, you'll take that song and you'll add it to the list of songs that you listen to. And at least myself, that's it. Like, I will listen to that song. Hey, I know that song. It's very rare that I'll be like, oh, they sound cool, or she sounds cool, or he sounds cool. What else do they do? Let me check them out. It's just, I'll add this to the Steam library, the list of stuff that maybe I'll get to one day.
Mm-hmm. There's also, I find myself doing this in a lot of cases where, like, I have a whole bunch of books, I have a whole bunch of movies, I have a whole bunch of, video games in the same way, that there's a certain amount of acting like a dragon, right? And this is probably something to add to the discussion of your parting gift at the end, that I think is a problem with most of society today, where we find joy in possessing things rather than in experiencing things, right? And that's not an accusation of anyone. Like, I do that, right? Like, I have video games on CD and DVD that I purchased that I have never played because I thought, this is cool, I'm going to get to this, and then I just don't have time, don't have inclination, whatever. Which is, it's one of the things that I've sort of changed about how I do things now. Like, you've recommended Satisfactory to me a couple of times. Did you watch the clip I sent you, by the way?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So I thought that this is perfect. This is a description of every goddamn video game ever. Just to give everybody a bit of context, it's Co-Carnage doing a Satisfactory thing. And he's like, oh man, this game is like the greatest thing ever. Okay, what's my next objective? 1,000 of each. Oh my God, I hate this game. It does not respect your time. And that's every video game put into a package. Where was I going with this? It's one of the things that I've changed recently in the last little bit. Like, I will pick a game and I will play it, and that is the game I'm playing. I would like to play Satisfactory, but I'm not going to even buy it yet. I'm going to wait until I'm ready to play it, and then I will buy it, and I will play it, because otherwise it will just sit in my Steam library with the other 50 games that are in there that I haven't played. I'm not very good at that. My discipline on that particular idea is not very good. I still do occasionally see something, go, oh, hey, this is $2. I'm just going to buy it. Good for the publisher or whoever is making money from selling that game for $2, and I don't mind contributing, but I'm probably going to put that in the library and never play it.
So I've sort of set the stage. I mean, this is a lot of what we've talked about here in the last few minutes is sort of why retro ideas, retro concepts are starting to appeal to me. It's not so much about liking old things, it's about liking the way we did things back then. The process of consuming something, the process of enjoying something, the process of doing something was just a little bit different. So I want to talk about your wife just for a moment. I've known Cindy as long as you have. Technically a little bit longer, but
technically a little bit longer, yeah.
After decades, you stop counting weeks, right? Like, I've known Cindy for weeks longer than you. Maybe a month or two. As long as I've known Cindy, she's been crafty, right? Like, she as sort of a hobby, she's done craft-like things. But in recent years, as she's retired, she's thrown herself, I would say, body and soul into probably the most retro human activity possible, pottery.
Darn close. Yeah.
Now, I don't know in her general sort of crafty stuff from her past whether she ever dabbled with that or not. I didn't ever notice it. I've never heard her talk about it.
No,
but
she started 4 years ago.
And I know certain part of it was probably, I'm retired, I need to have something to do. But as we've mentioned many times on this show, finding something for Cindy to do isn't hard. She's always doing something.
She's like the Energizer Bunny. It's scary.
So obviously this conversation is going to be skewed through the lens of me asking you the questions instead of having her on. But I mean, that's the show. From your perspective, why did she get into pottery? What is it about the pottery that she enjoys? Because she takes it more seriously than I've taken anything in my life.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, it's funny. Now that you mention, I can't actually remember how she got into pottery. I think she met somebody by chance one day and they started talking about, because the town that we live in, oh my God, the town that we live in is so weird, right? Like the population, I think, is like, I don't know, it's like around 1,000 people. And we literally have at least one person living here from every continent on the planet, like at least. With the exception of Antarctica, because obviously no one lives there. So like it's an incredibly multicultural place, because we're sort of the bedroom community for a national laboratory, right? So people come from all over the world to work here. And one of the things that means is that like there's a lot of, and it's a tiny little town, as I mentioned. So there's not a lot of, okay, like, Mr. or Mrs. Scientist is coming from wherever, and whoever their significant other is going to go, well, I'm in the middle of nowhere. It's not like I can just, I have to do something with my day. And there's not a lot of work for people in that sort of position to do. Now, in a lot of cases, they both work in the laboratory and so on and so forth. So, but there's a lot of clubs in town that were originally sort of started by the town, which was owned by the company, which is a national laboratory. So it's like almost like it was at one time a government town. So the Pottery Guild is actually owned. Oh, how does it work? It's like in trust by it's all very complicated. The golf course is like that. There's a curling club that's like that. The arena is sort of communally owned. There's all those kinds of things. So she met somebody and they're like, oh yeah, this is a pottery thing. It's like, oh, this is a crafty, nifty thing. Why don't you come and try it out? And then she did, and she loved it. I think that what really, and again, speaking sort of from because my role in her pottery is to carry stuff, right? Like that's my love. That is my love of, because pottery is heavy, right? If you're thinking about getting into pottery, just recognize that you are going to be lifting heavy things. She has actually stopped doing things on the pottery wheel just because it's too hard, right? Like that pottery wheel is, even if you get an electric one, like it's effort. Mm-hmm. We went in one day and she was going to teach me a little bit about pottery. So I got on the wheel and I did the thing, and I made a little Winnie the Pooh honey pot. I put honey on it with two N's, spelled it with a U, made one of the N's backwards. It's very cute. I was very proud of it. And everyone was very impressed because I made this little pot. It was about 3 inches across and about 3 inches high, right? And people are like, oh my God, that's your first time in the wheel and you actually made a pot happen, right? And I didn't understand until I tried to do another one and I couldn't even get the clay to stand up. Like it's really, really hard. Like there's the skill involved. Like when you see people doing like super tall vases and stuff, the skill level to get to that point is intense. So she started doing it, discovered she had a talent for it. Like she has a talent for everything, right? Like if there's a crafty thing or an arty thing, she just picks it up and goes, oh, well, I'm not very good. And it's like, oh, for God's sake. To put it into perspective, they had the Pottery Guild had their 70th anniversary show, right? They put on like a show. It was almost like a museum exhibit in the bottom sort of, what would you call it? It's like a conference room kind of thing in the basement of the library. And in the weekend that they did that, she sold like $4,000 worth of pottery, right? Like she's really, really good. I'm incredibly proud of her. And I've forgotten where I was going with this. You get me talking about her pottery and how proud I am of it. I'm just going to keep talking forever. So you're going to have to interrupt me at some point.
Yeah, I'll ask some questions. So, of the 17 things she was probably doing at the time she discovered pottery, what do you think it is about the pottery that she fell in love with? I'm drawing parallels and I'm trying to recognize like why my interests in things like woodworking and stuff have sort of bloomed out of nowhere. And the obvious sort of mirror to look in is, at least based on my understanding, is Cindy and her pottery. Very, very old thing that she, as far as I know, didn't do before, just started doing it. And, you know, the difference is that she's actively doing it and I'm not actively doing a lot of woodworking yet. But I think that, you know, if I ever gained access to a shop regularly, I could see myself maybe not quite as passionately falling into it as Cindy has with the pottery thing, but there's parallels to be drawn. So I'm trying to understand why I love this idea of woodworking through trying to figure out why Cindy fell in love specifically with pottery and what that says about her and sort of the world that she lived in. Like, what was the appeal other than this is something to do and I happen to have a talent for it? Because that describes the other 17 things she was doing that day.
That's a fair point. I think some of it has to do with the people, right? People who get involved in pottery are generally very laid back people. Any group of people is going to have some amount of drama, but the drama is like really, really mild. And people are just like, yeah, I like making pottery. Let's make pottery. It's fun. There's a bunch of different disciplines within the realm of pottery, right? You've got, you can do turning things on the wheel, which is how you make pots and vases and things. You can do hand building, which is basically sculpting with clay. You can do sculpting, and all of those things are sort of involved in that. And then you've got the various different ways that you can put designs on it. There's different kinds of clay that react in different ways, and when you put them together, they look different in the finished product. And the idea that you can just there's a couple of ways of looking at it. You can look at it as pottery is art, which it is, but you can also look at it as pottery is something that you can use. Like we have dishes and mugs in our cupboard that we use every day that Cindy made. And you can play with different colors, and there's different like effects that you can put on stuff. You can stencil things. You can make different shapes and sizes. You can make little tchotchkes. You can make plates and dishes. So there's a sort of, because Cindy has a very practical streak as well, right? She's actually taken up painting as well. I think she's a little bit more enamored of the pottery than she is of the painting. She's also quite good at the painting. I'm very jealous because I want to do that too. But one of the things I think that draws her to the pottery is like, okay, I start with this lump of clay. And at the end, I have this thing that I can use or give away and someone else can use, right? It's not something someone's going to hang on their wall and go, oh, look how pretty it is. It's, although there are some bits of that as well. She did a sculpture of a log. I don't know if you saw the sculpture of the log. I think it was on the dresser when you came up. It's a log. It has like the mushrooms on it and stuff. And a little dragonfly coming up the top.
I do remember seeing something like that.
Yeah. And it looks like a log with some mushrooms on it. Like it's like that's sculpture. It's art. But at the same time, she also does plates and, you know, like people will ask, seeing these plates with all the fancy designs and colors, like, what do I do with this? And the answer is like, put your meals on it, or like put fruit in it, or, you know, use it to serve chips or salsa or whatever. Like it's intended to be used. You know, and if it breaks, I'll make another one. So there's a certain practical aspect of this is useful stuff. And the other side of it is it's artistic, right? You can express yourself and do things to say, this is how I feel. So it's one of the reasons that I'm sort of attracted to woodworking as well, is I like making stuff that you can use. I have come to recognize that I don't have the same level of skill at such things as Cindy does, right? Like I can build a frame. Like if you want me to build a deck, I can build you a deck and you will be able to park a truck on it. It probably won't be pretty. It'll be functional, but that's what my skills are.
So do you think if Cindy had been introduced to pottery 35 years ago, just to pick a number, would it have connected with her the same way?
No, I'm absolutely certain that she would have looked, because one of the things about pottery is it takes a lot of time.
Yeah.
Right? Like you start with wet clay and you shape it, and then you have to let it sit for like a week. And then you can put colored stuff on it. Well, no, sorry, you let it sit for like a week. And then you bisque fire it, which is basically you get it hot enough that it hardens up a little bit. And then you got to color it. And then you got to fire it again. Right? And you don't just turn the oven on and do it, right? Because it has to be done at, it's like 2,700 degrees or something. So the time investment, I'm absolutely certain she would have looked at and gone, nope, can't do it. I don't think it would have appealed as much either, because she's always been crafty, but the idea that she can make art is something that came up more recently.
All right. I don't know if it helps me in my process of self-discovery at all, but it's a cool story.
Yeah, and it gave me a chance to brag about my wife, who is awesome.
Well, there you go. So to put a bow on this concept of an idea that we've stretched on for almost an hour now, one of the things that I've been trying to get at and examine is our love for retro, like, is it strictly about liking the way things were, or is it in part about not liking the way things are? Finding something that is different from the norm of today. Whether that's, you're listening to older music that you never listened to before, whether that's you're playing video games or getting into a new type of movie that you've never done before, whether it's you're looking at a hobby that you would have never thought twice about before. Is it that it's different from everything else today, or is it just that the old thing was cool? And I think, at least my sort of inclination is to say that it is probably equal parts both. There is an aspect of it is where this old shit is just cool, or it appeals to my tastes. But there is very much an aspect, at least in my situation, where it's like, oh, this is just different from today. And I don't know that I like the way things are today.
Well, there's a note in here at the end of your retro discussion that I think probably more belongs in the nerding under the influence after dark, the hard stuff.
Well, I'll ask the question. We don't have to have the discussion about it, because where I was trying to go with this, if there's an appeal to embracing old ideas, old ways of thinking because they are different than today, it's innocent if it's, I want to shut my brain off and work with my hands. It's innocent if it's, you know what, I'm going to put my phone away and load film into this camera and really think about the pictures that I'm taking. The question, which I'll throw out to the audience, and maybe we'll talk about it someday, is, does this apply to less innocent things? Embracing old thinking, be it societal ideas, political ideas, that people take comfort in it being different than today. Like if you as an individual, or just to throw an example out of there, like there's a lot of, even if you don't have malicious intent, and you don't have old ideas that other people would find distasteful. One of the things I note living in society today is I don't know what to call it. We'll call it community policing, maybe, where there's just so much emphasis now on political correctness will sort of fall into this bucket, right? Like even if you're not racist, you're not a bigot, you're not, you don't have controversial takes necessarily, there's still this constant effort to navigate the minefield that is people reacting to anything and everything. that is today. And I wonder if people fall into embracing some of these older ways of thinking. Let's call it what it is. I mean, there's a strong sort of, we'll call it a conservative movement that has very little to do with conservatism, that is all about saying, you know what, fuck it. I'm not going to do any of that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's reactions to anything, but that, like I say, that the discussion that belongs in a different place. But I do have something to go back to the sort of the original question. But yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that discussion deserves to be had in a heavier podcast than ours.
So listeners, think about the question. Think about the things that you enjoy. Think about the decisions that you make and the ideas you embrace. And just ask yourself why. Whether it's a hobby or whether it's your leanings on the political spectrum, ask yourself, why am I embracing this? Why do I like thinking this? Or even if you're not thinking it, why do you like doing it? Why do you like participating in this community? It's a takeaway. It's homework. It's the first official Nerding Under the Influence homework. All right, I cut you off.
It's fine. I think it belongs in the same bucket as retro, as nostalgia. I'm not certain that it's the same thing, but I think it's sort of, it has the same root in the same way that, like French and Spanish and English come from the same roots. They're very, very different. I think it's similar to that. I do think that there's a certain amount of, and this goes to video games, because I finished Horizon Forbidden West, and I went back to play Zero Dawn, right? And we were having a discussion last week, 2 weeks ago, whenever it was we were last together, about because they're working on remastering Zero Dawn using the Forbidden West engine, right? And you said, like, I'm not sure that it's worth their time. I would much rather they make a new game. And I don't disagree with that, but playing Zero Dawn again, you know what? I think it's worth it. One of the things that I find about retro is that I go back to something that is familiar and that I'm good at. I don't have to learn something new, right? I can go back and play Pac-Man, and I'm probably not going to be as good at it now as I was when I was 10. But I don't have to learn a new control schema. I don't have to learn a new story. I'm familiar with the game. I'm familiar with it. It's familiar, right? And there's a certain amount of comfort that comes from things that are just familiar.
But I would argue, and we've discovered this as if we've tried to go back and play things like old video games, there's comfort in the idea of playing Pac-Man. When you go back and play Pac-Man, I would posit that you will play it for 10 or 15 minutes and be like, oh, wow, I'm not enjoying myself. This is awful.
You will remember all of the frustrations that you had the first time you played it. But the idea, right? Like, I would go back and play Pac-Man if it was remastered in like 3D as a first-person shooter. Because the idea is fun, right? Like, the idea of Pac-Man is comfortable. It's like, I remember this, right? It's a member berry.
Yeah. All right. Well, I've exhausted, and I am exhausted having gotten through that conversation. So let's talk more specifically about some video games.
I used to be an adventurer like you.
Stay a while and listen.
Now, I promise that this will be the last time we talk about Horizon Forbidden West.
I don't.
This week.
Okay. Yes, this week. Yeah. So I finished the game, right? It's one of 3 games, I think, that I've ever finished in my life. Because I finished Knights of the Old Republic, the original one. I finished Zero Dawn before this one, and I have now finished Forbidden West and the expansion.
Yeah.
So, spoilers for anyone who hasn't finished the game. But one thing that I would like to call out, there's 2 things, actually. There's something that going back to play Zero Dawn again, which I did almost immediately after finishing Forbidden West, is that the voice actor who plays Aloy has really stepped up her game. Right, I remember enjoying Aloy's voice acting in Zero Dawn, and it is better in Forbidden West. Going back, I find myself going, wow, like there is a stark contrast between these 2 games. The HDR implementation in Zero Dawn is abysmal. There's a few graphic setting where I'm just like, oh my God, I need to be able to turn off the lens flare and the bloom. I need to be able to turn it, and you can't. It's not possible.
Well, I think it actually released this week, didn't it? The remake.
Did it?
Yeah, the remaster, the whatever you want to call it. I think it. I don't know if it's out on PC. I think it might be though. It definitely was out for PS5. So,
well, I am going to go and buy it because I think it's absolutely worth it because it is still a great game.
Well, there you go.
So, going back to Forbidden West, there is a moment of tenderness at the end of the game that literally, brought there were tears in my eyes, right? Just because at the end of the game, Aloy has found someone. And it was joyful, right? It wasn't schmaltzy. It wasn't over the top. It wasn't like Baldur's Gate 3 level of romance. It was just like,
okay. So you're talking
this
Broken Shores then specifically,
yes.
Not the end of the base game. Okay.
Yeah, no, at the end of Burning Shores. And it was just a moment of it felt like real life. This is not video game, cartoony, anime, whatever. It was just, wow.
I don't want to spoil it, but I do want to say, because we've hinted at it before, I mentioned that people were probably going to be upset at the fact that they leaned into the fact that Elizabeth had, through the information that we learned in the game, she had an orientation that some people in today's day and age still find controversial for some reason. Oh, Aloy's gone woke. So they explore that a little bit in the Broken Shore expansion. What I really enjoyed about it, I mean, they give you sort of a decision at the end of it. It's a meaningless decision in that, it's the end of the game. Nothing plays out one way or the other. They just kind of set up sort of a future. Not necessarily one we'll get to see in the next game, but just you sort of set Aloy on a path by choosing whether to explore this relationship or not. But what I really enjoyed about it is that it almost doesn't matter what decision was made there, because they spent a lot of time. You got to see Aloy vulnerable and awkward.
Yes.
About the way she was feeling for this other character into the game. And it played out in her dialogue, it played out in her acting, it played out in the conversations and decision making that was happening. And regardless of whether that relationship ever comes to fruition in your own game canon, because you sort of decide at the end, those moments still happened and they were great.
Well, here's a question for you, because there's three choices you can make. You can make the heart choice, the head choice, or the fist choice. I'm curious, which choice did you make?
I'm pretty sure I went with the heart choice.
I'm not certain that if you didn't go with the heart choice, that you aren't a sociopath.
Yeah.
Right now, there is something to be said for the brain choice, which is basically I have feelings, but we really can't explore them. The world is exploding. We really need to deal with that first.
But that would be so counter to the overarching theme that drove the whole game, which is that you need other people. You can't do this on your own. And that reached a certain level with, embracing all the stuff and the characters in the main game. This was the next logical leap.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. That is the one in my mind that fits the story best. So I looked at it and went there is no other choice. This isn't a choice to me. This is a question of, do you want to derail the story or not?
Yeah.
Anyway, I really enjoyed that.
But they put the choice in so that, the people that are uncomfortable with the idea can at least have a little agency or whatever. They didn't have it crammed down their throat, which is, I'm sure, really what that was about. But I'm happy that, all of the stuff that mattered happened before that choice. You weren't given as a player the choice really to opt out of Aloy's awkwardness and behavior and stuff up until that point, save for just deciding to not play the game.
Yeah. And that's just it. Is it like that? It just happened, right? It happened and you watched it. Because it's an interesting thing, because I always feel like in these two games, it's like, you are not Aloy, right? You are sort of pushing Aloy in a direction and choosing what she does next, but she isn't you. which is an odd kind of a thing for a game of this kind, because usually it's like, you are the hero, put yourself in their boots. And in this particular case, it's like, no, you're sort of, it's almost like a choose your own adventure novel. And I really, really enjoyed that aspect of the game.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next thing I have to say, because I started off with that because that was the more important bit. The next thing I have to say is that final boss battle in Burning Shores was the most frustrating thing that I have ever done in a video game ever, bar none. I could not figure out because up until that point, it was like, beat everything with your spear. Your bow doesn't work anymore. And then the final boss fight is do everything with your bow. You can't do it with your spear. And it's coming at you like a bullet hell game, right? And I'm like, what's going? This flashing lights, things, it's stuff, and it's like, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do here?
There was a little bit of foreshadowing of this in a previous episode where I talked about the fact that I didn't think the ending of the first game felt epic in sort of that cinematic way. But I did feel that the ending of the expansion felt that way. But I had the caveat that in order to achieve that, the gameplay shifted away from the way the gameplay had sort of been up until that point.
Yes.
Part of it is sort of forcing you to use certain weapons and stuff that maybe you hadn't been using up to that point. But even things like camera angles and stuff like that shift to create a different sort of sense of sometimes claustrophobia. Sometimes it almost felt like stepping back into like one of the older Resident Evil games or like Final Fantasy VII, where the camera is almost fixed for a little bit and you're not,
Yeah.
I understand why they did it. And I think I was obviously much less frustrated than you were by the entire experience. So please tell me, lay it all out for me.
All right, so I'm going to go off on a little bit of a rant here.
Spoilers.
Spoilers. In the general sense, I understand why they did it as well, and I don't really have an objection to it now that I've done it. It was frustrating in that I couldn't figure out what was happening, and on the good side though, like what they did that worked really well is that I felt a genuine sense of tension. Like, oh my God. I'm actually feeling in those last moments, once you're inside the machine and trying to shoot out the light balls or whatever. I felt like a genuine sense of like, oh, tension, like this is serious, and I feel the stakes, like it was visceral.
I would say from the point where you started chasing the Horus, again, spoilers, where you're out on the beach and you're having to sort of deal with what were they, heat sinks or thermal something or other. From that point on, I was sweating.
It was very different. Oh yeah.
A lot of that felt almost like a series of QuickTime events at points, but I was still amped up. The tension was there. Yeah.
Yeah. No, they did it. Like, it was executed very well. And the stuff with the heat sinks I found frustrating, but frustrating in a challenging sense, right? Yeah. It's like, okay, I know what I have to do here. I get it. I see it. I missed it the first, I don't know, like 2 times. I'm like, what am I doing? Oh, I see. There's a thing that pops out. I have to shoot that. Okay, I got it. It's tough. It's difficult. I mean, I was playing on easy mode. I can only imagine what this shit is like on like ultra hard. I imagine it's like reload from the beginning, start over every 30 seconds. But once I got inside the Horus, it was like one of the only real complaint that I have about Forbidden West that is actually better in Zero Dawn is that it plays like a platformer without the precise controls of a platformer.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So the controls are a little bit better in Zero Dawn, but the safety margin is a little better in Forbidden West because you've got your rope caster and you've got your shield wing. So it's like, oh no, I fell off. That's fine. I'm not going to die from falling, which I have done several times in Zero. I think I did like twice in Forbidden West, and then I just turned on the auto deploy shield wing and I'm like, yeah, whatever.
We're into the Sasquatch schnitzel, by the way.
Yeah, there's going to be a moment here in a moment where I take a hiatus because my beer is also empty. But once I got inside the Horus, like the platforming in there was frustrating, but not bad. Right? It was like, okay, this is difficult. I understand it's the final boss fight. It's supposed to be difficult. That's fine. I think I failed a couple of jumps sort of going around the whirligig. But then you get into the room with the guy and he's behind the shield. And once again, there's that thing that I complained about before where Aloy says, oh, there's a reactor or a capacitor or something that's popped up. I should take care of that. I'm like, where? Because it's so dark.
Yeah.
Right? It's just dark with flashing lights all over the place. If you have epilepsy, for God's sake, don't play this game. You will die. Right. And I'm looking and it's like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, I have to do things. Maybe I can take care of them. I'm like, well, dude, what is it? Like, I can't even see what's happening. There's so many flashing lights and stroby things going on. Once I figured it out, it was a challenging thing that happened. And I enjoyed that. And I did enjoy the cinematic nature of the end. But it was like there was a period of about 15 minutes where I'm fairly certain my neighbors were getting ready to call the cops. I was banging on my desk. If I was playing this thing with a controller, it literally would have gone out the window. It was just like, oh my God, this is frustrating. And I want to sort of frame that in the right context. Like, it was frustrating, not in a way that made me dislike the game. It was frustrating in a way that felt appropriate to the stakes of the moment.
Frustration is a feature, not a bug.
That is correct. I think it's intentional, and that's okay. I'm glad it's over. I wouldn't want to go through that. I wouldn't want to go through the frustration again. I will play through the game again, which is a rarity for me to actually finish a game. Well, I've never finished a game twice. I'm going to do Zero Dawn. I'm going to go right back into Forbidden West, I think. I will do it again. And this time it will be much less frustrating, and I'll be able to pay attention to a few more of the details of the story, I think.
Well, and now you know generally what to look for in those more frustrating moments. You'll probably breeze through them.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions then. Despite your frustrations, this ending felt different from how the main game ended to me.
Me too.
Which did you like better? Did you like that sort of frustrating yet cinematic experience, or did you like I think the first ending felt a little bit more, I don't know. I wasn't satisfied with it, but like you pointed out that it sort of made sense for the character and who she was and whatnot. So do you have a preference? Because they do contrast each other like significantly.
Oh, they are very different. And I don't think that I would express a preference. I think that they were both good in their own way. I'm a little bit contrary in that I very much like building up to a crescendo and then having it go off like a damp squib, where it's like, oh my God, like this is a fireworks display that you're just not going to believe. You've never seen anything like it. And then it goes, boo, wee, and it's over.
Yeah.
Like, I love that. I love the like giant build up to, there was an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer that was great. They spent like 40 minutes leading up to, oh my God, this demon is so bad. And when he comes, he's being summoned by this, and they're trying to summon him, and there's blood and there's symbols and stuff. And then he shows up and he's 3 inches high, and Buffy just steps on him. Mm-hmm. It's one of the highlights of that thing where it's like, it's this giant build up to, well, this is just no big deal. Right? We just handled it. And I think because there was a lot of challenges along the way, and the fact that the end challenge isn't always like, it's not always, Mook, mini boss, mega boss. Sometimes it's Mook, mini boss, even minier boss. Yeah. Like, I'm okay with that as a story structure. Speaking of, so there's a teaser of the next game in the epilogue, which very much makes it seem like the next game is going to be more of the same. And I like that. Right? It's a tiny little bit of a raising of the stakes. We've talked about this before, like the difference between Zero Dawn and Forbidden West was not so much a raising of the stakes as it was like an expanding of worldview. Mm-hmm. Right? And it feels like Game 3 is going to do that again. And I'm 100% cool with that.
Yeah. I think there's a difference between simply playing the hits and recognizing what it is that you are and sticking to an identity. And I think at least when contrasting the second game to the first game, it wasn't them so much doing just more of the same is let's keep the basic formula and turn a couple of knobs so that it's fresh and but not take huge risks either. At least,
Yeah.
in terms of the basic gameplay and style and sort of narrative. And I think they pulled that off. I will be interested to see if they can pull it off a third time.
I have faith.
Yeah, well, I mean, the game is mechanically engaging enough that even if the story does end up landing a little bit flat, it's still a worthwhile game to play. So my other question that I would have on this is, now that you got to play through Broken Shore and see how they sort of examined that particular Zenith character, you get a little bit more detail about them, who they are, what they're like, how fucked up they've always been. Does that change the way you feel at all about how little of that we actually got in the base game?
Not really. I think like it was almost unnecessary, right? Because there's the unfortunate nature of modern life is that there are two kinds of people. There are people who are going to look at sort of the messaging of the description of those people, and you're preaching to the choir. And there's people who are going to look at it and go, I don't understand. You like, these people are not the villains. You know what I mean? It was enough. Like there was enough sort of description of who the Zeniths are in the base game to say, yeah, I know they're the bad guys. I know everything I need to know about them. I know everything I believe about them, and that's fine. Exploring it a little more was also fine. It wasn't necessary, but I think it was really well executed. If that makes sense. Like we didn't need it, because those of us who were like, yeah, these people are bastards. Like my opinion of them didn't change. It got neither better nor worse. It was just like, here's a whole bunch of confirmation of things that I already thought.
Yeah. And we talked about it a little bit a couple episodes ago where we talked about the Ted Faro thing, right? And it's almost like they're just doing those explorations a little bit out of sync. Like the Ted Faro thing, which is mostly a callback to the character's significance in the first game. I mentioned that it felt like, well, they should have put that effort into it being one of the Zeniths, and they kind of did in Broken Shore. So I imagine we'll get a little bit more of it in the third game, because it's still tied very much narratively to what the Zeniths did and what they were running from.
Well, yeah, and giant spoiler, right? The enemy in the third one is going to be the concentrated essence of what made them who they were in the first place. So I imagine that we will get a lot more of who they were, just in facing off against that, which I mean makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Third game, let's turn all of the knobs up to 11.
One thing I will say just before we move on to the next thing is, now that this has become more of a series of games, I'm finding it interesting contrasting sort of the bad guys in this to something like Mass Effect, where the bad guys, the Reapers, you learn a little bit about them, but because they aren't human, you don't have the expectations for learning all of those details, where I found, at least in this, because they are human, and I'll use human in quotation marks, humanoid.
Humanish.
Well, I mean, they were human, but the reason I think this way isn't because they were human specifically, but human-like in nature. They could be an alien species, and I would feel the same way. My expectations and what I want out of it are a little skewed because of that, rather than sentient machines that, which was the case with the Mass Effect thing. You want to talk about some EverQuest?
I do. And it kind of goes back to some stuff that we talked about a while ago. We were playing through a WoW dungeon, and we talked about a character in EverQuest, a PC named Reply. And we sort of set it up. We were so I'll set it up for our audience. We, as a group of people, the group that I was running with in EverQuest at the time, were at the bottom of a tier 1 dungeon, like sort of in era. And I think we were there in era. So it was a pain in the ass to get to the spot. And it was a very dangerous place to be. And I mean, like it took, if you were very clever and very sneaky, you could do it in about 15 minutes. If you fought your way down, it was probably closer to 45 minutes to an hour to get there. It is possible to do certain areas of this solo, but it is like right on the knife edge. If you make one mistake, you're done. And then you're spending an hour getting back. So we're making our way down and we got there and I poked my head around the corner. I think it was me who did it. It could have been one of the other people. It doesn't really matter. Poked my head around a corner and there was somebody in there doing the solo thing and they were the equivalent of juggling plates. Like they were doing CC on like, I don't know, like 5 or 6 different critters. And any one of these things, right, is not a challenge, but it is reasonable work for a group of 6. And this person is doing it solo, right? So if their timing is off by just a little bit, I poked my head around a corner, pulled one thing out of whack, and they died, right? I didn't realize they were there. And like we had a cleric with us, so they were resurrected. Rather than speak to us and say, hey, what are you doing? You screwed up my stuff. And saying like, can you help me get set up again? Because we were moving on. They immediately went around and tried to gather all of the things in the dungeon and bring them down on our heads. Which, I mean, we had been playing together at that point for like 2.5 years. So we just handled it, right? It's like, okay, yeah, this is a lot, but we can do it. And we did it. So they did it again. Right. And at this point, it's just like, okay, well, this is like perfect grinding experience for us. We'll just wait here until they do it again. Eventually, they gave up and went away. But the thing that I wanted to bring out from this story is that like we tend to assume what other people's motivations are, especially in an anonymous setting. Right. So rather than, say something and say, hey, like you've done something bad here. Like, did you do that on purpose or was that an accident? Like, can we talk about this? People immediately assume that the other person has malicious intent. And I mean, sometimes people do, right? But that's the immediate conclusion that we all come to. And it's very weird to me that we have, like, is that something that we've moved to? Or is that something that we have always done and we're just noticing it more now with the anonymity of the internet?
Yeah, I don't know. My gut tells me, and we've talked about sort of the tribal nature of people before and us versus them and some sort of instinctual kind of need to categorize people as us versus them. I think that as soon as you're dealing with a person that you are qualifying as them, there's zero benefit of the doubt. Whether or not we're actively looking to find the negative and assume the worst, or why we would want to do that, I don't know. I certainly don't have answers, but it's definitely something I see.
Yeah. It's weird. So it's another thing to just sort of put in your back pocket and go, hey, when someone does something and you think, wow, they've done this maliciously, you might be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's really all I wanted to say about that.
Nice. So you hinted at it. We ran some WoW dungeons the other day. We were trying to get in the habit of them. We've been sucking at it lately because of real life, but we want to just play some games like multiplayer on Friday nights. Started up this Friday night nerd thing. There's been like 4 of us that have participated, but I talked about it before. One of the things that I thought might be interesting is running some classic Burning Crusade era WoW dungeons just as a group. And I've set up a private server. Yes. All the, piracy, not privacy, emulation. Is it good? Is it bad? Whatever. I don't really want to have that discussion. what I've set up is a private server just running on one of my machines here. And what's sort of unique about it is that it has bots, like player bots that are scripted well enough that you can actually log into this server and feel like there's other players there even when they're not. It's not perfect, but it's weird because it's a simulacrum that is, at sometimes it feels more real. And then you have the weird sort of, again, us versus them thing where it's like, these bots aren't big enough assholes. It just isn't quite real.
It's just to give you an idea of how real it feels, randomly wandering around in the Blood Elf City, which I can't remember the name of. I got invited to a guild by a bot that I have subsequently joined, and I actively participate in guild discussions.
Yeah.
And it feels like real people.
It's kind of a surreal experience, and knowing that it's bots almost allows me to enjoy it a little bit more. So,
yeah,
a couple of conversations I want to have about this. Let's talk about that night that we ran some dungeons to sort of spin it. There was 3 of us, so we were trying to balance a couple of bots in our group. We were low-level horde characters, so we did one run through Wailing Caverns, and then we moved on to... we did Ragefire Chasm, then we moved on to Wailing Caverns. Having the bots and having the healer be a bot created some challenges. I don't know. What did you think of it?
I had fun. The healer bot was a little bit challenging. It actually brings me to the first point that I want to make, which is I'm pretty sure I'm going to switch from rogue to priest.
Okay.
Or paladin. Just because there's sort of 3 roles that are reasonably critical to success, right? You've got your tank, you have whoever is doing your crowd control, and then you've got your healer, right? And those are the 3 sort of pivotal things. And I think it makes sense for us to have that. And you're playing a tank. And Rich is playing it's not a ranger, hunter, which is the crowd control sort of role. So I'm thinking that I'm going to switch to a healer role.
I did some experimentation on the side, and I'll touch on this a little bit more later. I ran 5-man groups through some of that content using 2 healers. And it smoothed out some of the issues without necessarily like changing the difficulty too much. So that would be a satisfying alternative if you weren't going to look at doing healer. I'm happy to let you do that though.
Yeah, I'm finding that. So I've never really gotten into WoW, and I'm still not super enthusiastic about it. Right? I enjoy playing. Right? I enjoy playing, but I enjoy playing because of the people, not because of the game. And I figured out what it is about WoW that I don't like, and it's the pace of the animation of the PCs. Right? It's not the pace of play. The pace of play is fine. It's reasonably slow, and it's that way on purpose because lag then is not an issue, right? You've got your global cooldown and everything goes sort of tick, tick. It's almost like turn-based, right? It's turn-based with a timer, basically. But the thing about the game that drives me bonkers is the slow motion jog that everyone is always doing. And it just makes me go, ah.
If you were moving your feet faster, even if you weren't actually moving faster, you'd probably be fine.
I'd be fine with it. And that's a me problem. Like that's not a, hey, WoW sucks because this is a problem inside my brain.
What I will say about it is that, and I hadn't noticed it before. I mean, I spent most of my time playing like old versions of WoW, got into retail and had been playing modern versions of WoW, going back and playing vanilla, and like when we don't have mounts, felt slow to me, like slower than I remember it being. And I didn't realize that they've actually changed the way that felt as the game sort of progressed. Like I always assume that this is the speed it was at. Yes, things feel faster once you got mounts and stuff like that. But there does seem to be, even if it's a purely vibes-based difference, a difference in walking from playing vanilla to playing, I will say, anything from Cataclysm onward.
Yeah. Yeah, it is different. And that's the thing is I find myself frustrated playing because I'm playing a rogue and the melee character, just like the feeling, because you have to constantly position yourself, right? Which I don't have a problem with, but it just feels wrong. So I will be much more comfortable standing in the back and just wiggling my fingers.
Okay.
Because then movement doesn't matter, right? It's about playing the game. I'll mostly be looking at like Healbot or whatever the grid thing is, where you go, I just heal them.
Healbot, Voodoo. There's a couple of different add-ons that you can use.
I think it's Voodoo that I was playing, because I did play. We played the guild that I was playing, EverQuest Progression Servers. Is we did WoW Classic for I want to say 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I was playing a druid, and Voodoo I think was the one that I got comfortable with.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, it was one of the more popular ones later on. It didn't exist originally back during like Vanilla and Burning Crusade. There was some backports to it now, and then of course for Classic itself. Healbot was the popular one back there, or there was two add-ons that you could use together. One was called Grid, and the other one was called Clique. That you could use to sort of achieve the same basic thing. Essentially, for anybody that hasn't played, what it allows you to do is have some really sort of concise unit frames where when you're dealing with larger parties or raids, you got a whole bunch of information on screen at once, and then you can map abilities like heals to different interactions, left click versus right click versus modifier key left click, right click, so that you can cycle through spells while sort of interacting with these unit frames in a way that just it makes it easier to manage sort of group healing that particular role.
Especially raid healing.
Yeah. Even when I'm like we're tanking or playing DPS, I would run those unit frames just as that sort of quick snapshot. We talked about it when you were griping a little bit about Foundry and the D&D thing, how you like to have that sort of quick snapshot of the players and their current sort of status. And in WoW, I use those types of unit frames to do specifically that.
Yeah, and in Foundry and in D&D, it's literally just so that I have an idea of like, where's the party at? Like, how hurt are they?
Yeah.
Right. So that I don't have, that's just another, like, it's one of those things that computers are really good at keeping track of. And I would like it to keep track of it so I don't have to.
What I've found interesting since I've set up this server is I'm going to try and say this the right way, because I don't want to be misconstrued. I like WoW. I've always liked WoW. But whenever I play WoW, it's almost like I don't like WoW. And I try to find the weird meta within it that allows me to like WoW. So I was never one that really enjoyed sort of the mainstream grind, level up, get to end game, do a lot of raiding, rinse and repeat when an expansion drops. I dabbled with that a little bit, ran a raiding guild for a while. But I always got into the weird stuff like Twink PvP, where you find different meta in the game, or sometimes I would, even when I was doing like quasi high level, like 2v2 and 3v3 arena, for instance, I would always be playing like the weird builds, the stuff that wasn't the cookie cutter kind of standard meta. And what I'm finding playing on this is I'm almost enjoying the experience of working with the bots and trying to get that to be effective to do the content, like roll some dungeons, more than the actual act of running through the dungeons themselves. And I found something similar when I got back into multi-boxing back in the day. So I was running a lot of 5-man teams, even through like official stuff. I wasn't one of those guys that was out trolling people too much in world PvP or anything. But I would run, especially when they did the recruit a friend stuff for WoW, where you'd buy the battle chest, you'd get 30 days or 90 days of sub time, and they had the recruit a friend bonuses where you could level up a whole team quickly. And there were a lot of benefits to do it, but like mechanically, solving the problems of trying to play 5 characters at the same time, I was enjoying that more than playing WoW. And since we ran that dungeon, I've been experimenting with running bots and trying to figure out how to sort of optimize that process, whether it's just me plus bots or whether we had another person. And I'm enjoying turning those knobs as a new experience more than actually running the dungeons.
Yes, and I understand that. And that is a large part of the reason that I don't finish games like Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
is because I'm continually trying to optimize. And I enjoy that optimization more than I actually enjoy the game.
And I guess as long as you're enjoying something about it, then whatever, money well spent.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, you know what? I have something in the area of book reports that I did not write down.
Oh, well, let's roll that then.
A book?
That's right. When I was your age, television was called books. And this is a special book.
It's a book that you recommended to me. I started reading the first book in the Expanse.
Oh, very nice. I'm about 5 pages in, and I put it down and haven't gotten back to it yet.
Oh.
Not for any other reason that I decided I was going to read it. And I enthusiastically got into it, and then I just got pulled away and never got back into it. I was enjoying the little bit that I read.
It's interesting because it's when I was in high school, I read like Ray Bradbury and Robert Heinlein and there's a bunch of others that I would forget. But like the sort of pulp writers that were writing in the 40s and the 50s into the 60s and 70s, right? And the style very much feels like a throwback to that, right? Like it's real world space travel. So instead of light speed to another galaxy and we're going to go to the forest moon of wherever, we can't get out of our solar system because everything is just too far. And we're going to go on a hard burn from here to there with like spilling nuclear reactor dust into the solar system is going to take us 3 weeks to get back to Earth.
I think I mentioned it before. 'Cause, I mean, I've watched the show like 3 times through now. And even from like the very first episode of the show, that was something that I really enjoyed about it. They do this thing where you've probably got that far in the book or you're getting there, where they're on a ship. They're deciding to not answer a distress call. Something happens where their minds are changed at the last minute. And unlike something like Star Wars or Star Trek, where you'd see this funny animation of a ship sort of banking in an arc to turn around, the thing spins around, does a hard burn, which is mostly like to decelerate before you can move the other direction. And the ship nearly tears itself apart while doing it. Mm-hmm. Because, I mean, that's physics. That's the way it would actually be. But you don't ever see that in all but the hardest science fiction. And this isn't the hardest science fiction, like it has mainstream appeal, but still makes efforts to, I don't know, work in a little bit of realism.
Yeah, and that's the funny thing. Like I remember there's a Robert Heinlein, I think it's a short story or a novella, where there's a family who's in space and they're on a spaceship, and I think they're traveling from Earth to Mars or something. And they're towing behind them a mass of bicycles. Specifically because bicycle, like you don't care about aerodynamics, right? It's space, whatever. And there's all kinds of remarkably useful parts on bicycles. There's good steel on bicycles. There's cables, there's wires, there's gears, there's sprockets, there's bearings, there's spokes, all useful stuff. And the young kid goes out to pull them in so that they can take something off of this mass of bicycles. And there's an immediate caution of, no, don't pull it any faster because you still have to stop it when it gets here. Right. And if you can continue to accelerate it, but when it gets here, it's going to stop in a hurry on your face. Mm-hmm. So, and it's just like, there's little details like that. I will say that the book takes a little while to get going.
Yeah.
Right. I was a solid 3 or 4 chapters into it before I was like, okay, this is no longer a slog. I'm now interested. And it's not that it's not good. It's just that it harkens back to an older style of fiction where it was, here's a book. You're going to take some time and you're going to sit down and read it. Right. So there's a sort of an almost an expectation. The first 3 or 4 chapters is going to be your first session of reading. Right. And if it takes you 2 or 3 sessions, you might put it down and never pick it up again. Mm-hmm. By the time you get that much, though, you're like, I'm really interested to see what happens next.
Well, I'm going to have to get back into the book then so that we can talk about it some more.
Yeah, that would be good. Do we have table talk? We don't really have anything new to say.
Let's get into parting gifts.
And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Anybody want a peanut?
I know we've flirted around the edges of this already in this episode. This particular topic might be a little controversial. So if you don't want to risk hating us for some weird ideological purposes, turn the episode off now. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Shane's a communist.
I mean, yeah. The channel, it's a YouTube channel that I want to shout out. They've sort of pivoted in past years, and I like the direction they're going. It's called Second Thought. And like the elevator pitch is that it's like education and analysis from like a socialist perspective. And they did a recent video at the time I threw this in the doc. It might still be their most recent one.
It's not. They have a new one.
Okay. About the Heritage Foundation, which is the group behind Project 2025. This isn't specifically about Project 2025. It's sort of about the group and their creation. And they were along back in like the Reagan days, and he kind of loved them too. It's interesting to watch. I like the idea of think tanks. There's like if you're into game theory, like specifically like war game theory in a real life, like there's a whole bunch of really interesting things you can dig into during like post-World War II, Cold War era kind of stuff. Looking at groups like RAND and whatnot. And I mean, it's scary shit. It really is. But some of the world's most brilliant minds were pulled into these groups to do everything from, strategic planning to just trying to think about, all the million different ways the world could end tomorrow. Heritage Foundation is an organization that sort of tried to spin itself as a think tank, but they're very much anti-think tank.
I have a comment that fits really well right there.
Okay.
The Heritage Foundation is the Fox News of think tanks.
Yeah.
Because everything they do is very superficial and it's very aimed at a specific spin on this is what we want as opposed to this is what is or what could be.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an agenda-driven organization. And, it's like bad science where you start at the conclusion and then work your way towards finding evidence to support your conclusion. They do a good job of trying to legitimize whatever the agenda is, and I don't mean that in a positive way. Anyway, that video in particular is interesting because it does provide a little bit of insight into just how organized the current state of affairs is. And the channel in general is worth watching. They've covered all sorts of interesting topics. It's not always current politics. And for anybody that is, dissatisfied with the status quo and perhaps leaning a little further left than, at least in North America, what we would consider liberal or left-wing politics, I think I skew beyond that. Right up your alley. And if you're not one of those people, you know what? Watch it anyway. It might at least give you some perspective and stuff to think about. It's not necessarily a sales pitch to try and convert you into anything. It is just a good presentation of stuff through the lens of people that lean more in a socialist direction.
I watched it. It was good.
Well, I think that's it for me, man, unless you have something else you want to talk about.
I don't think so. I mean, I think we covered everything that I've thought of in the last 2 weeks.
Been a slow 2 weeks for you.
Winter is coming.
Yes, it is.
Time to switch over to a darker beer.